They say the worst thing about drowning is the struggle to hold your breath. The physical effort to keep your nose above water, and then when you can't anymore, the burning sensation that hits when the water enters your lungs. For some people, the anticipation of knowing you're going to drown is worse than just getting it over with. I've even covered episodes where the people facing the possibility of drowning heavily considered just getting it over with, instead of waiting to see if they would actually survive long enough in rising waters to be rescued. Well, in this story, 6 men entered a dangerous cave in Canada, and 2 would be left behind in rising waters with little hope. And one of them would feel that burning sensation as he fought to keep his head above water. I'm Tatiana Bunch, and this is Occurrence. It was the morning of December 5th, 2015, and a group of 6 friends made plans for an outing in Cascade Cavern. It's located on Canada's Vancouver Island, and it's a pretty legit cave. It's 1 mile or about 1.5 kilometers long and 338 feet or 103 meters deep. It's full of turns and tight squeezes, and it's a complicated cave. It's structured like if you take the letter S and flip it backwards, and then connect another backwards S to the bottom of that so it snakes down. And it's not a perfect reverse S as you go down. There's lots of straight stretches connected to large chambers, followed by narrow squeezes in a random order. Inside, there are sections filled with water and places with waterfalls. At the very bottom of the deformed reverse S, there's a large waterfall. I'll describe it more later, but after that waterfall is the bottom of the cave. There isn't much more cave left to explore after that. The cascading waterfalls are actually how Cascade Cave got its name. The group going to the cave was made up of Adam Shepard, a paramedic, Zach Sursky, a chef and volunteer firefighter, Matt Watson and Arthur Taylor, who are both computer programmers. There's also 33-year-old Andrew Munoz, who is a paramedic and an expert caver. He actually used to be a caving guide. And lastly, there was 43-year-old Jason Story. He was the oldest in the group by a decade and the one with the least experience. Prior to this trip, he had only gone caving 4 times. It was actually Andrew, the expert, who introduced him to caving. But Jason was married with 2 kids. He went to college to study drama and ended up owning his own window washing company after he graduated. How he went from studying drama to eventually becoming an entrepreneur, I don't know, but what a pipeline. Jason, Andrew, Adam, and Zach drove together from Duncan, about 80 miles away, to the parking lot of a log cabin candy store in Port Alberni. They met up with Matt and Arthur there and also got the keys to the cave. Yes, keys to a cave, because Cascade Cave is dangerous enough that anyone wanting to go inside has to have a key to the metal door blocking the entrance. In order to get the key, every single person planning to go inside has to sign a waiver. No waiver, no key. But once they have the key, all 6 men drove up an unmarked trail for half a mile before parking in a nearby clearing. They took inventory of what they had. They had 2 bags with a small gas-fueled jet boil stove, food, water, a first aid kit, a Mylar blanket. Those are the ones that look like aluminum foil and keep you warm with your own body heat. And they also grabbed their ropes, harnesses, and carabiners. By 10 a.m., they reached the metal door that is actually on the ground and easy to miss if you don't know what to look for. The door isn't a grate that you can see down. It's like a rusty metal latch, completely covered, not see-through. No window, no nothing. They opened it and climbed down 30 feet, one after the other, on the ladder that was placed there, and the last person down locks the door behind them. They tied the key to the bottom of the ladder and turned on their headlamps. It was raining heavily the whole morning and didn't stop before they went down. So it was about 41 degrees Fahrenheit or 5 degrees Celsius, and pretty damp inside. As they continued on, the steady sound of dripping turned into a steady flow of water, and pretty soon they were walking through ankle-high water. After a little bit, Andrew asked if everyone was okay, and they all responded back that they were fine. But about 45 minutes into the outing, Adam said he couldn't keep going because his back was hurting. A few weeks earlier, he injured it, and the constant hunching over was getting to him. So Matt went back with him to the entrance so he could let him out and lock it back after he left. Once he was done with that, Matt went back to join the other four. They continued deeper into the cavern, crawling and sliding, depending on what section they were in. Some passages were big, where they could all stand up and walk through easily. They were huge chambers, and others were small enough that they could barely fit through one at a time. They continued like that for 90 minutes, and the entire time making sure that they always stayed within a range of 100 feet of each other between the first and last person. The entire time Jason is starstruck, because him being the least experienced meant he hadn't ever seen anything like it. They eventually reach the bastard's crawl section of the cave. The narrow passage is too small to stand up in, and it leads to a tight downhill. It's short, but 4 streams converge there, which makes the water flow faster. So Andrew told everyone to get ready to crab walk through, and once they made it through, they went to the Double Trouble. The Double Trouble was the waterfall, and it got its name because there was a rock sticking out of the cave wall that split the waterfall stream into 2. The group set up their ropes and rappelled 50 feet down, using the slippery rocks for leverage. The entire time, Jason's heart is beating so fast, it's about to burst out of his chest, and he's just thinking, I guess I got that harder challenge I was looking for. But he made it through that part fine. They all did. It was almost 1 p.m., so they found a spot to sit and eat a snack. Andrew cooked beef and chicken stew with rice on the jet boil they brought, and after a 20-minute lunch break, they continued on. They had been in Cascade Cavern for about 3.5 hours, and they were almost to the end of the cave, which was their goal for the day. They wanted to complete the entire thing and were super close. They were less than a quarter mile away from the end, but they only made it 300 feet when Zach started shivering. And it was bad. He was shaking violently and the temperature didn't change. But sometimes the cold can hit people unexpectedly. I, for one, am one of those people. I'm always cold, even when it's not cold, and make a point to bring a jacket everywhere I go. Obviously, this is different, but I can relate, and I'm sure some of y'all can too. But Zach's sudden onset of the shivers had all 5 guys deciding that it was time to turn back. They head back the way they came, retracing their route. Matt was in front, then Arthur, Jason, Zach, and Andrew was last. The sound of rushing water started getting louder, and the amount of mud seemed to grow compared to the amount they dealt with on the way down. It was sticking to their heels, it was slowing them down, and it just made it so much harder to climb back up. It was almost 2:15 p.m. when they were finally approaching the Double Trouble. The water was so loud, it was deafening. And instead of the manageable gushing waterfall from before, the water was roaring and an angry white froth. Jason's more than a little dumbfounded because he doesn't get how it could have changed so fast and starts to wonder if it was because of the rain. When they rappelled down before, they left the rope attached. So when they came back, Matt hooked his harness back onto the rope again and hauled himself up. Again, it's only 50 feet, but it's tough and you have to be exact. They have gloves on to help, but the area is so wet, it's slippery, and finding the ledges to put one foot and then the other foot, one hand and then the other hand, people are injured a lot doing it wrong. And it doesn't help that the water is deeper than it was before and freezing cold. After Matt makes it, he throws the rope down to Arthur so he can climb up, and then Jason followed. But after Matt and Arthur made it up Double Trouble, they continued on through the bastard's crawl, and then kept going. By the time Jason made it through there, they were gone. That area was only big enough for one person to be there at a time, which is why no one waited, but that's where the passage split into two. So Jason doesn't know where to go and decides he'll just turn back and ask someone who is coming up after him. He starts crab walking back and makes it 15 feet when what was streaming water just hits him in this huge surge, and it's hard enough to put him right on his back. Jason was submerged and could feel the pressure of water building up behind him. He needed to move, but he couldn't because his boot was stuck between two rock shelves. He knows if he can't get out, he's dead, because the water building up behind him would eventually push him out of the crawl just like a bullet out of a gun. He'd go straight over the waterfall and onto the rocks below. So he starts trying to call for help, but he can't because he needs air more. He's stuck for 5 minutes trying to yell for help, but every time he opens his mouth, he ends up gasping for air instead. It feels like he's been stuck forever. He pictures his family. His 5-year-old son Jack, who loves airplanes. His 3-year-old princess little girl named Poppy. And he thinks of his wife, Caroline. They had been married for 16 years, and all he could think of was that morning. When he woke up that morning, he gave her a kiss and told her to sleep in. And she told him to be careful, and he responded back, telling her that he always is. But now it seemed like he was going to drown or fall to his death, whichever came first. And then suddenly, Jason hears someone yelling at him to keep his head up. While Jason was stuck, Zach made it up double trouble and saw that Jason was stuck inside the bastard crawl. He immediately turned and yelled down to Andrew that Jason was in trouble. So Andrew quickly climbed up and yelled instructions to Jason. He told him to keep his head up since he could barely see his face through all of the water. He was only a few feet away, but his positioning in such a tight space made it so Andrew couldn't pull him out. Jason was flailing in water, fighting to get some air since he can't get out. And Andrew reaches in and tells him, "Put your feet on me. Lift your butt up and float." And he's yelling, keep coming towards me, and keep your head up. "You got it, Jace. Come on, Jace." And, just encouraging him. And it worked because eventually Jason's hands came out and then his face. And he was swallowing air like he had the hiccups, and he just says that his leg is still stuck. But the way he said it was so slow and slurred, it was like he had a stroke. He just can't get his own boot out, so Andrew reached in and found it and told him they'll get it out together. And 20 minutes after getting stuck, they managed to get Jason out. Andrew puts him on a narrow ledge just a few inches above the water, and Jason just kind of sat there with a crazy look on his face. It was the face of someone who knows that they just barely escaped death. And Andrew told Zach to stay with Jason so he could go grab the supply bags. He makes it back 15 minutes later and tells Zach that the water was still rising, so he should go catch up to Matt and Arthur just past Bastard's Crawl. Andrew had to get Jason warmed up before they could try to get out, but he told Zach, "If we aren't there in 30 minutes, get search and rescue." So Zach left and Andrew attended to Jason. He wouldn't say it out loud, but he was scared Jason was turning hypothermic. He was shivering before, but he wasn't shivering now, which was a sign he was getting to the dangerous side of being too cold. He wrapped Jason in the Mylar blanket and started the jet boil. Once he had enough hot water, he poured it down Jason's clothes. After a while, Jason's color returned to normal. So Andrew asked him if he was ready to get out of there and let him know that he was happy to have him back. Where they were was about an hour from the entrance, but they needed to get moving before the water got too high. So again, Jason goes up the crawl with Andrew, and the water is hard to fight through. It's literally pushing them back. Once they get close to the top, Andrew realizes there's less than 4 inches of air between the water and the ceiling. It's not even close to being enough space for them to keep their heads up to breathe. So Andrew yells out that it's still too high and for Jason to turn back. So they did, and right at the top of the waterfall, Jason saw a ledge. It was at an awkward 45-degree angle, and it sloped out and down, but it was their only option. There was just enough room for both of them to fit, since it was 6 foot by 6 foot space. They couldn't go to the base of the waterfall because the water was still rising. And like I said before, There's no separate room to go into after that. And honestly, if there was, it wouldn't have been a smart move to do. But on the ledge, Jason goes in first, so Andrew's on the outside, taking on most of the spray from the water passing by. His legs were braced against the ledge across from them. And I'm sure it was uncomfortable, but he wanted to keep Jason as dry as possible and keep them both from slipping out. The water kept rising, getting close to the ledge, and the force of it kept causing the wind to whip past them. But they had nowhere else to go. It was 6 p.m., and they were trapped 200 feet underground, with water rising around them. Zach left to meet with the others 3 hours ago, and they could only pray that the group made it out to get them help. But for all they knew, the others didn't make it anywhere and were on the other side of Bastard's Crawl. They could be stuck there, trapped by water. They could be injured. They could even be dead. They had no idea what was going on, and they could do nothing but sit and wait. Jason and Andrew could only share the Mylar blanket for warmth, since the jet boil was out of fuel. They sat in the dark to save the batteries on their headlamps, and it helped a little because it let them forget how small of a space they were in. At one point, Jason dryly says, quote, "If we don't get out of here, our wives will kill us," end quote. And there's no sign of rescuers and nothing else to do, so the two men chose different ways to keep calm. Jason leaned into his theatrical training and worked on his breathing. He pulled the sweatshirt up over his nose to try and warm his face, and he forced his breathing to slow down and move through his diaphragm up to the base of his skull. He kept his thoughts on his family, but every now and then couldn't help but wonder if his life insurance policy had enough coverage. Andrew mentally chanted a mantra from the book Dune. He said, "Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little black death that brings total oblivion. I will let the fear pass through me, and when the fear is gone, only I will remain." As the hours passed, neither person moved an inch out of fear of slipping and being taken away by the water. Every 20 minutes, they would check in with each other. Andrew would ask, "You still with me?" And Jason would reply, "Yep." "You still good?" And then Andrew would say, "Yep." And anytime they dozed off, they would jerk back awake, scared that in their sleep the water would rise without them realizing it and drown them, or scared that in their sleep they would shift and slip. Every now and then, someone would turn on their headlamp to check the water level. That cycle continued until 5 a.m. when the water started to look like it might be going down. Andrew wanted to wait for a bit longer and see if that was the case. After another hour, the water level dropped enough for them to be able to keep their head above the water and try to get out. After sitting in the same position for 12 hours, they slowly started to unfold their bodies and, of course, immediately felt pain. Jason actually screamed from the pain in his groin. It turns out he strained it. And they have to crawl on all fours through Bastard's Crawl. So every time Jason moves a leg, he was yelling out in pain. But he didn't let it stop him, and Andrew cheered him on and told him that he could do it every single step of the way. They had their heads tilted sideways with one ear in the water and the other above, just enough for their nose to stay in the air pocket. And they made it through. Over the next 90 minutes, they made their way to the entrance. At some points, the water reached their chest. They reached a passage that was large enough for them to walk upright, and Jason saw a flicker ahead. He yells to Andrew, "I see lights," and then they both hear voices. So they both start yelling, "Hey, we're over here." And then a rescuer yells back, "Andrew? Jason?" And 20 hours after entering the cave, they're rescued. Jason had tears running down his cheeks, and all he could say was, "We made it." It turns out Zach and the others made it out and called for help, but members of the ground and cave search and rescue squads didn't arrive until 9 p.m. that night. At that point, the water level and how strong the water itself was forced them to retreat and make a plan to try again later. They actually made it 35 feet from Jason and Andrew's position on the ledge, but the sound of rushing water made it so the two that needed rescuing couldn't hear the rescuers or see their lights. And on the way out of the cave, they actually saw equipment bags left behind. Andrew wanted to get into the sleeping bags and make some soup and wait for help, but Jason just wanted to get out of there, so they continued on. The equipment bags belonged to rescuers who left them when they had to retreat. After they made it out, they had a lot of Tim Hortons, and Jason was yelled at by his wife, of course. And the whole ordeal didn't stop either of them, though, because Jason still goes caving, and both Jason and Andrew have been back to Cascade Cave. I guess the spirit of adventure is alive and well for both of them. But what do you think about the Cascade Cave incident? Leave your comments and reviews. They really help out the podcast. And if you haven't already, don't forget to follow or subscribe if you enjoyed the episode. Sources can be found at occurrencepod.com, which is linked in the show notes. Stay safe, and I'll be back next Thursday.